Sunday morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Futures. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Today, political persecution. President Trump gears up for the fight of his life after what he called a rigged trial and election interference. Just ahead, Trump Organization Executive Vice President and President Trump's son, Eric Trump, is here on next steps after the former president is found guilty of falsifying business records. Plus, the verdict sparking a wave of support for the 45th president, with money flooding into his campaign. The campaign locking up $50 million in 24 hours after the verdict, capped with an additional $100 million from a major donor. As 45 goes to bright blue New Jersey for the UFC fight, and the crowds rally behind him. Coming up, former U.S. Attorney and Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe on why the guilty verdict does not seem to matter to Trump supporters. Plus, former White House senior advisor and America First legal president Stephen Miller, along with Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake, with reaction. Plus, Dr. Anthony Fauci facing the music this week on Capitol Hill. Why was vaccine maker Moderna paying Fauci during the pandemic? Kentucky Senator and Senate Homeland Security ranking member Rand Paul ahead of Fauci on the record testimony Monday on Capitol Hill. It's all right here, right now on Sunday Morning Futures. And we begin this Sunday morning with America in uncharted territory. For the first time in its 247-year history, a conviction of a former president and the impact so far. Since Trump was found guilty last week of 34 counts of falsifying business records, President Trump told me yesterday that he has raised nearly $200 million in the last few days, including $100 million reportedly from one donor alone, Sheldon Adelson's widow, Miriam Adelson.
The good news is that I think we've set a record beyond all records for fundraising.
And the president told me that specifically it was close to $200 million. Immediately following the verdict, the donation website for the Trump campaign crashed with a record number of small donors looking to make a contribution to the campaign. The president's legal team confirmed it will appeal the ruling, and the campaign said within hours of the decision, the money flooded in, raising a record $34.8 million in small donor donations immediately in just a few hours, 30% of that total from new donors. The case, of course, brought by Manhattan Democrat District Attorney Alvin Bragg after federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York declined to charge Trump. Judge Juan Merchan set the sentencing of President Trump for July 11th, 4 days before the Republican National Convention opens in Milwaukee. With just 156 days before the election, former Trump senior counselor Kellyanne Conway, with me Friday on Mornings with Maria on Fox Business, said that the verdict does not change much for most Americans.
Here's what the verdict does not change at all. The fact that Joe Biden is every minute, every second of 81 years old. That's not going to get any better between now and November. Kamala Harris can't put a sentence together even when it's already piped into a teleprompter. And when you ask them what would you do on inflation, the answer, Trump. Energy independence, Trump. The border, Trump. The Middle East, Trump. Ukraine, Trump. Their entire campaign is built around taking down Donald Trump rather than lifting up America.
Joining me now in this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is the Executive Vice President of the Trump Organization and President Trump's son, Eric Trump. Eric, thanks very much for being here this morning.
Morning, Maria.
You've been with your father every day in that courtroom. You saw all of this play out, and you watched the impact. What can you tell us this morning, your reaction?
Well, it's a little bit of a tale of two cities. I go into a courthouse and I see absolute corruption from a judge whose daughter is apparently making millions and millions of dollars fundraising off of my father effectively going to jail. I mean, turning down every witness we have, a one-sided court. And then I was there for him, and you just showed the clip. I was there with him last night by his side as we walked into UFC 302, and you see 40,000 people in Prudential go absolutely crazy. The entire night they were chanting, USA, 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 we love Donald Trump. I mean, in the middle of a fight, I cannot tell you how many times that chant broke out. This country loves Donald Trump. You just mentioned a second ago that the judge scheduled sentencing for 4 days before the RNC convention in Milwaukee, the Republicans' biggest day of the entire campaign cycle, their big event, right? Their big show. The judge puts it 4 days before. The American people are not stupid, Maria. They see exactly what's going on. They're turning Donald Trump into a martyr. No one believes in the world that they're sentencing the 45th president of the United States of America and a person who will likely be the 47th president of the United States to 34 felony counts for a $130,000 payment that was invoiced as a legal expense, that was written as a legal expense 8 years ago. No one believes it, especially as, people get slashed and killed in New York. And as Alvin, let me just finish with this. As Alvin Bragg was sitting there on sentencing day or on, at the final arguments, a maniac was yielding a machete in a McDonald's in Times Square, slashing 3 different people. I mean, that's the state of New York right now, Maria. Yet they're going after a former president and their biggest adversary for $130,000 8 years ago. America does not buy the nonsense, and that's why my father's got the reaction he got last night. That's why the newest Daily Mail poll that came out about 3 seconds ago has my father up another 6 points. People do not buy the sham. They do not buy this corruption. They see through it for what it is.
So what have you seen in the way of money raising? I spoke with President Trump yesterday. He said it's nearly $200 million. That is astounding. Is that number correct? Where does that number come from?
Well, this might be a little inside information, but as I was leaving my house about 37 seconds ago, I asked my wife, what are we up to now? And she said, just in terms of small dollar, we're well over $70 million. This is $21 donations, $43 donations, right? Small dollar donations. If you add the large dollar donations to it, you're over $200 million, but you're over $70 million. And by the way, Maria, wow. 30% of those people have never been seen before by a political party, right? I mean, these are Americans who are pissed off. They're coming out of the woodwork, and they want to support a guy that they just believe is getting bamboozled by a system. And we saw it with impeachment 1. We saw it with impeachment 2. We see it where they weaponize every liberal DA and AG across the country with one intent, to take him down, to slander him, to ruin his reputation, to try and divide his family, to try and bankrupt him, to throw him in jail, to do whatever the hell they can do. And America sees through it. They know exactly what's going on. Al Capone had 1 count, 1 felony count. Wow. Donald Trump has 34. Over $130,000 8 years ago? A case that everybody dropped, a case that no one would pick up, and something that was completely legal?
So,
in front of a sham judge who gets every anti-Trump case, the probability of this judge getting every single anti-Trump case would be like 1 in 26 million. Yeah. There's a lot of judges out there, and he gets every single one. And it's supposed to be random, Maria. You know that. And it's not. They're spoon-feeding it to a guy whose daughter is apparently profiting and making a lot of money off these cases.
Yeah, we're going to speak with the former DNI, John Ratcliffe, in a moment. And he told me this weekend this was coordinated with the Biden administration. He's going to go through some of the things that he believes happened in terms of meetings with White House counsel. Is that what you're saying, that this comes from the White House and Joe Biden?
Oh, there's no question about it, Maria. I mean, the number 3 at the DOJ, a guy named Michael Coangelo, he left the DOJ to go into the DA's office in New York City to prosecute everything Donald Trump. He got demoted from the DOJ in Washington, D.C., the number 3, to go to New York to prosecute everything Donald Trump. Where do you think that came from? Of course, it's weaponization of the system. Biden can't make it up a flight of stairs. He can't get through a sentence without stumbling. He certainly couldn't do an interview like this. So how do they do it? They go after him civilly. They go after him criminally. They go after his family. They subpoena his friends. They do everything that they possibly can. They pull every single string to try and take the guy out of the race. The problem is Americans are really, really smart, and they get it. They get this system. There's only so many times you can cry wolf before people see right through it, Maria, and that's why my father had the reception he had last night, where he had 40,000 people going absolutely nuts, chanting USA. They want their leader back. They want their patriot back. They want the person back who will actually fight for the United States of America, and that's why we're going to win. We're going to win on November 5th.
Well, you just said the big money donors. I mean, that's a real change in sentiment from what we saw just 6 months or so ago. I mean, you've got people like Steve Schwarzman who are saying, I've got to back President Trump. You have the Adelson situation with $100 million. What are you hearing? Why? Is it because of this very thing, this verdict, or are they just sick and tired of the policies that you're laying out here?
Oh, Maria, if I could have the entire show, I'd go through each one of them. But I mean, let's start with the economy. Let's start with inflation. Let's start with jobs. Let's start with the fact that inflation is grossly outpacing wage growth. How about the entire world is a hornet's nest right now between Ukraine and Russia and everything that's happening in the Middle East and our allies being attacked and instability and the lack of patriotism and crime in cities and the fact that you can't go into a CVS and buy something because everything's locked behind plexiglass. And I mean, how long do you want me to go on that subject?
Yeah.
People are sick and tired of it. It's funny, in 2016, we didn't have a single one of those people, and we didn't have a single, congressman or senator, and now all of a sudden you see the massive support. I mean, people want security. People want safety. They want the ability to live the American dream. They want to be able to take their kids to Disney World.
Yeah.
Eric, they want
everybody
prosperity.
wants to
and they
know.
want somebody who will actually be a cheerleader.
Everybody wants to know what this verdict means for the presidential election. You know that. That's all anyone's talking about at this point. Will President Trump be able to run and win? Will he be able to do the things that he was planning on doing for the campaign to actually be victorious in November? What are the restrictions they're putting on, and what is your answer to that?
Well, Maria, as I walked out of that courthouse that day, I said May 30th, 2024 might be the day that won it for Donald Trump. I'm telling you, I've never seen this country more upset about what's happening. And, it's a law of unintended consequences. The Democrats always dig so deep that they end up finding themselves. They think that their little trickery will be overlooked, that they're smarter than everybody else. America's looking through this nonsense. And I think the harder they hit him, the more they do this, the more money he's going to raise, the more independence he's going to get. As I mentioned, I mean, the swing of independent voters after this conviction has been unbelievable because no one believes it. And, they're literally feeding him, certain segments of the population that he might not have had in 2016 and 2020 because for the first time they realize that the system's coming down, that he's the victim. He's the victim that oftentimes some of their communities were. And you see them swing. You look at the African-American vote, right? That's swinging over to Donald Trump in spades. Look at the Hispanic vote over the last couple of years. Look at the youth vote right now, Maria. I mean, we've never had more youth support out there. And people know exactly what's going on, and they want a strong country again.
It's all about who counts the votes, right? You mentioned your wife, Lara Trump. She's the co-chair of the RNC right now. What has she said? What is she doing? What are you doing in the campaign and for your father in terms of securing this election and ensuring that we have, in fact, a fair election and transparent in November?
Well, I have a beautiful wife, but behind that beautiful smile is somebody who is absolutely working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to secure the vote and raise a lot of money. And what she's done at the RNC, along with Michael Whatley and everybody else, I mean, they've upended the whole organization. They've turned it into the greatest political fighting machine ever. And believe me, their eyes are on that problem every single day because it's a real problem. Anybody that doesn't say that voter fraud is real is either naive or foolish. It happens. It happened in 2020. And we will not allow it to happen again. And believe me, Lara Trump is all over that. And I'm very proud of the work that she's doing, and I'm proud of the work that the RNC is doing. They're killing it, Maria.
Real quick before you go, Judge Merchan sent the sentencing date on July 11th, 4 days before the RNC convention. What are your expectations for the sentencing?
Yeah, well, go figure. You never know with these people, Maria. Honestly, the amount of pressure that they're going to put on this guy to do something incredible and insane. And that will backfire on them again, as it always does. I don't even want to try and, predict what's going to happen. I really don't. These people are corrupt. They're horrible. The system's corrupt. I was in that front row, and I saw it every single day. And when you're sitting there, you just wouldn't believe it. If you weren't seeing it with your own eyes, you wouldn't believe that was the legal system of the United States of America. You'd think that was the legal system of Venezuela or Iran or some third world country. Not the United States of America, and certainly not the capital, the business capital of the entire globe, New York City. And I hope the appellate courts get this right and restore some confidence to the legal system in the U.S.
Eric, an extraordinary moment. We so appreciate you being here this morning, and of course, we'll be watching it and keeping a spotlight on it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Maria.
All right, Trump Organization Executive Vice President Eric Trump. Quick break and then more reaction to the verdict and what's ahead with Senator Rand Paul, former White House senior advisor Stephen Miller, and Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake. But first, Hunter Biden is now set to appear in a Delaware federal courtroom tomorrow to stand trial on 3 felony gun charges of his own. The prosecution says it will introduce key evidence that originally was dubbed Russian disinformation right before a presidential election by 51 former intelligence officials. Former Director of National Intelligence and U.S. Attorney John Ratcliffe with analysis right after this. Welcome back. Hunter Biden's federal gun trial is set to begin tomorrow in Delaware, with the first son facing 3 felony charges related to his purchase of a firearm while lying about his drug use. Special counsel David Weiss's team wrote in a filing with federal court that they intend to introduce Hunter Biden's laptop as evidence in the trial, saying it's, quote, real, and that it contains significant evidence of the defendant's guilt. This despite just weeks before the 2020 election, 51 former intelligence officials signing a letter saying that the laptop had all the markings, the hallmarks of Russian disinformation, as well as former House Intelligence Committee Chairman Congressman Adam Schiff pushing the narrative that the laptop was Russian propaganda. The claim was quickly shut down by the then Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, right before the 2020 election with me on Mornings with Maria on Fox Business in late October 2020. Watch.
Let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there's no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Chairman Schiff or any other member of Congress that Hunter Biden's laptop is part of some Russian disinformation campaign. It's simply not true.
Joining me now with more is the man himself, former Director of National Intelligence and U.S. Attorney John Ratcliffe. John, thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Good morning,
I want to get your reaction to all that has taken place. You've been a truth teller along the way. Your reaction to President Trump's guilty verdict.
Well, President Trump said it best. This was rigged. It was rigged from start to finish. It was rigged from top to bottom. There was a rigged prosecutor. Clearly, it was demonstrated in his press conference where Alvin Bragg said, I did my job. No, you clearly didn't. No state prosecutor has ever charged federal election laws as a state predicate crime. Not in New York, not in Texas, never, anywhere, not in the 250-year history of our country. You add to that a rigged judge. Look, this judge's bias against Donald Trump and how he ended up with all of the Trump cases is one issue. But beyond that, you know, his instruction to the jury in this case is also something that has never happened before, as far as I'm aware, in the history of this country. He told a criminal jury, your verdict against this defendant does not need to be unanimous. You can choose from any number of things that I'm going to give to you that you can find the president did wrong, and even if it's not unanimous, you will find him guilty. And that's what happened. So, you know, Donald Trump is effectively, because of that, in this unconstitutional charade, been deprived of a right to appeal. Yes, I get it. His lawyers will file an appeal. But how do you appeal a case when no one in the country still knows what the underlying predicate crime he was convicted of? So all of this shows how out of bounds this was, how ridiculous this was, how rigged this was. Judge Merchan and Alvin Bragg know that it was rigged, but they don't care because they think that they got what they wanted, which is to label Donald Trump a convicted felon. But Maria, it sure doesn't seem like it's working, not with the American people. They know it's rigged, and they know who likely rigged it.
Well, you're talking about rigging, you're talking about election interference, the president's talking all the time that all of this is just because they want him to get out of the race and interfere in the election. When is interference fraud? I mean, Eric Trump just said there's voter fraud. Everyone knows it. How do you cross the line? When is election interference election fraud? And what are the consequences for that?
Right. Well, clearly, this is election interference. These facts are not debatable, Maria. What happened in this case is that after Donald Trump announced he was going to run for president, 4 different sets of prosecutors went to Joe Biden's White House to meet with Joe Biden's lawyers and his Department of Justice. From Georgia, from New York, Letitia James, Jack Smith, shortly before he brought his indictments, and of course, Alvin Bragg, who not only met with Joe Biden's lawyers in the White House, he took one of Joe Biden's lawyers from the Department of Justice to have him bring this case. So, you know, all of these people in all of these jurisdictions, Maria, are proxies of the Biden White House. All of these indictments brought in 4 different jurisdictions by lawyers who met with Joe Biden's lawyers. Joe Biden's taken a page out of Iran's playbook here, Maria. You know, as he defended Iran after the attack on Israel, remember he said, well, there's no direct evidence that Iran was involved, but Iran uses proxies. It's very clear to everyone now that Iran, directed and funded, even chose the timing of that attack in October, just as they use Hezbollah and Hamas for that purpose. That's what's happening here. Joe Biden is using legal proxies to conduct this lawfare against the American people by convicting Donald Trump and trying to take, the preferred candidate off the ballot box. And it's just not working, Maria. The American people see through this.
Well, I mean, President Biden was asked about that very question the other day, and he turned around, he gave the reporters this really weird smile. Let's take a look at this. He didn't really answer. He just smiled when they asked just exactly what you're talking about at the White House on Friday. And you're calling these prosecutors proxies of the Biden administration. I mean, what are the consequences of that? I mean, you seem to have specific dates when all of these prosecutors went and met with White House counsel.
Well, they are specific dates. This isn't debatable. These are facts that all of these lawyers in different jurisdictions met with Joe Biden's lawyers shortly before they brought indictments against Joe Biden's political opponent. Maria, that is an overwhelming body of evidence of election interference. It's one thing to deprive Donald Trump of his civil rights under color of law, which is clearly what happened here in this case. But if you attempt to oppress anyone's right to vote, take away anyone's right to vote, as they've done to Donald Trump here, you've committed election interference under Title 18 or Title 52. And, again, the Biden Justice Department isn't going to investigate itself for its complicity here. But when Donald Trump is elected 47th president of the United States, the American people are going to want this to be investigated because very clearly there's seems to be overwhelming evidence of election interference by the Biden administration.
Well, you could also say that about Anthony Blinken creating that letter, which was hiding information from the public, including, James Clapper and John Brennan signing the 51-person influence letter to say that the laptop was Russian disinformation.
Well, Maria, you already pointed out the irony of 4 years after the Trump administration officially told you that Hunter Biden's laptop was not Russian disinformation, the Biden administration, through their Justice Department, now has to authenticate that laptop in a case against Joe Biden's son. The irony there is rich, but the most important thing is this, Maria. By authenticating that laptop and acknowledging that it's true, what are the consequences of that, right? Because what Alvin Bragg said and what the White House has now endorsed in saying that this was a legitimate conviction of Donald Trump was, Alvin Bragg said the crime here was that Donald Trump hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. So what about all the people that hid damaging information in the form of the laptop during the 2020 election? That includes Joe Biden. That includes his Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. That includes John Brennan and James Clapper and the 51 former intelligence officials who, Maria, sent that letter out after the Trump administration officially, through me as DNI and through the Department of Justice and the FBI, all acknowledged that this was not Russian disinformation. Yeah. There should be an investigation and there should be consequences of that. And the way for that to take place is for Donald Trump to be elected.
Real quick, as a lawyer, as a former U.S. attorney, what are the restrictions that President Trump will have to face now? What are you expecting from the sentencing on July 11th?
Well, everything's been unprecedented up to this point in time. Right. There's no basis to impose any criminal actual sentence. So is it possible that they'll do that to keep him off the campaign trail? Yes. It's also possible that they'll say, well, gosh, we could do all these things to Donald Trump, but we're just going to put him on probation, give him a fine, give him a break to show that how fair we are. Because, as I said, Maria, what they want is the label of convicted felon. Right. But you know what? The response to that from the American people is, we know you're lying. We know that that's not true. He raised $50 million from the American people in 24 hours.
Right.
And the polls show that the American people increasingly want Donald Trump and they don't want Joe Biden, because America is in crisis right now, and they know that they need a tough SOB. They don't need someone that's weak and cowardly. And there's only one guy running for president right now who's tough enough to take this on and stand up to that, and that's Donald Trump.
Okay, we'll leave it there. John, it's always a pleasure to get your instincts on all of this.
Great
Thank
to
you,
see
sir.
you.
John Radcliffe joining us this morning, former Director of National Intelligence. Quick break and then the COVID cover-up. Who was getting paid to lie to the American people? Anthony Fauci testifying this week after explosive emails show his team's efforts to delete so-called smoking guns and hide the truth from the public. So how will Fauci explain away all of it after telling Kentucky Senator Rand Paul this?
You are implying that what we did was responsible for the deaths of individual. I totally resent that. And if anybody is lying here, Senator, it is you.
Oh yeah, Senator Rand Paul is back with us with the latest ahead of Fauci's public testimony happening tomorrow on Capitol Hill. He's live. Stay with us.
It all looks more like a conspiracy to cover up. But to cover up what? To cover up how they do business? That's one thing. Or to steer everyone away from gain of function research and the risk that goes along with that, or the lab leak possibility.
And that is the chairman of the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, on their investigation into Dr. Anthony Fauci and his handling of COVID-19. Chairman Wenstrup is seeking access to Fauci's personal email accounts and cell phone records after new email evidence uncovered by the panel appears to show that Fauci used personal accounts to conduct government business during the pandemic. Here's Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer questioning Fauci's former colleague, Dr. David Morenz. Watch.
On April 21st, 2021, you wrote that Dr. Fauci is, quote, too smart to let colleagues send him stuff that could cause trouble, end quote. On June 16th, 2020, you wrote, we're all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns, and if we wouldn't put them in emails, and if we found them, we'd delete them. Now, did you ever have conversations with Dr. Fauci regarding deleting emails?
I don't remember any such thing.
You don't remember?
No, sir. And it would be very, Tony and I don't have those kind of conversations.
And even if they had the conversations, he doesn't remember. Fauci is set to testify tomorrow on Capitol Hill for the first time since retiring as director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases back in December of 2022. Joining me now with a look ahead is the ranking member of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Senator Rand Paul, who has been at the forefront of this investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Senator, thanks very much for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So Dr. Fauci is going to be testifying tomorrow. What are you expecting?
Well, you know, our investigation has confirmed that he did indeed lie. He committed a felony. He said that they did not fund, that the NIH did not fund gain-of-function, dangerous research in China. We now know that to be untrue. We know he committed a felony. But what we've discovered now is that there was a massive cover-up from the very beginning. There was a behind-the-scenes effort to change the opinion of people. Many of the Fauci colleagues all believed that the virus did come from the lab. Their opinions were all changed, but then all evidence was then covered up. They began using burner phones. They began using couriers. They said, we can't do things electronically. I can take things by hand to his house. It sounds more like the CIA than the NIH, but it's unbelievable the amount of things that went on. They say, oh, we're safe now. I've deleted all those emails. I think we're safe now. What in the world would they actually mean by we think we're safe now? So there was a massive cover-up, and there's so many people that need to be interviewed in addition to Fauci. We have David Morenz, who worked for him for 20 years. We have the FOIA lady, the woman at the IT woman at NIH, who was explaining to them how to avoid FOIA and how to break the law. She needs to be deposed. There's all kinds of stones that could be unturned, but ultimately the buck stops with Anthony Fauci. He was in charge of the place, and he has the responsibility not only for the cover-up, but also responsibility for letting dangerous research go on that led to a pandemic, in all likelihood led to a pandemic that killed millions of people.
But I mean, think about that. President Trump is in charge. He finds out about this COVID pandemic coming, that this disease is about to kill all these people. He's got his team right there. He asks, what do you think this is? Dr. Fauci knew all along that they were doing this gain-of-function research, and he says, oh, well, I think it's natural. I mean, really?
Well, see, we now have his emails, contemporaneous emails from the exact time when he was saying it was natural, nothing to see here, and that the NIH had nothing to do with it. We have the private emails where he and everyone in his inner circle was saying, oh my goodness, we've looked at the genetic sequence and it looks to be manipulated. It looks to be a creation of a lab. And then they do the opposite. And it's even more nefarious than that. A few weeks later, Anthony Fauci gets up in the White House at the podium and he quotes a scientific paper to prove that scientists believe this came from nature. But he didn't tell people that he commissioned and edited the paper. He was behind the origins of the paper. And so there's so much dishonesty going on here and so much abuse of power. We've got to get to the bottom of this, and mainly because this research still goes on. It goes on in the United States, and it needs to be regulated. I have a bill coming forward that I hope will be bipartisan that will have an independent agency that oversees all of this dangerous research.
Well, I mean, why are they lying, and why did they mislead you? Is this about money? Was Dr. Anthony Fauci being paid by the vaccine makers to push the vaccine on all of us?
We don't know. And his response to me was this. He said the law protects him and that he doesn't have to reveal royalties, which is, I think, an affront to the American people. We think the law does not say that. But to clarify the law, I've introduced a bill, and it passed unanimously out of my committee. And this bill would require that all royalties be listed on their forms from now on. I think we can get it through. We'll see whether the Biden administration will oppose this or not. But this is a step for transparency and for sunlight. Everybody should be this. There shouldn't be this revolving door between Big Pharma and the NIH, and then all of a sudden, we do know that $450 million went from Moderna to the NIH because they share the patent, but does that make them conflicted in approving NIH or approving Moderna drugs now? How can you be objective when you just got $450 million from Moderna? How can you treat Moderna objectively from there on out?
That is exactly my point. Exactly my point. We're going to be watching that. Okay, do you believe if President Trump were to win, should there be a prosecution of Dr. Anthony Fauci?
What I'm asking President Trump, and what I hope he will offer, is access to all of the records. Right now, the NIH is withholding records. They're withholding records more so than the CIA or the FBI. They have completely withheld all records of the decision-making process on whether or not this research was dangerous or gain of function. So I hope Trump will open the books. I hope Trump will say, you can look at everything, and that my committee will be allowed to investigate this thoroughly because we've been hampered by the Biden administration. I think if he does that, he'll go a long way towards getting some voters who are still skeptical about the lockdowns and about the Trump administration's reaction to the virus, who want to see more strength and more opposition to the deep state within the public health administration.
So your expectation is that President Trump could still win the election despite what has taken place? What is your reaction to the conviction and the guilty conviction?
You know, a sad day in America, and what I worry about is something even bigger than Donald Trump. I worry about strife. I worry about war in the streets. I worry about 50% of the public believing that the court system will be used against them. You know, once upon a time it was because of the color of your skin, now because of the shade of your ideology. I worry about that, and I worry when half the country thinks they won't be treated fairly, what happens and how people react. If you look at records violations and you look at Hillary Clinton, $8 million expense, and they slapped her on the wrist because she got an $8,000 fine, and that's actually probably appropriate, some kind of fine for mislabeling things. But there's a real question whether it is mislabeled. Was it a legal expense? Sounds like it was a legal expense. All non-disclosure agreements, I believe, are legal expenses. I'm guessing there are hundreds of them in New York City as we speak, and my guess is not one of them have ever been taken to court. I think Donald Trump is the only person ever prosecuted for this particular crime.
Quite extraordinary, Senator. It's wonderful to talk with you this morning about it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Rand Paul joining us this morning in that exclusive. Quick break and then the guilty verdict and the presidential election. Former White House senior advisor Stephen Miller and Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake with the impact of the Trump conviction 156 days away from the presidential election. That's next. Stay with us.
This is a case where if they can do this to me, they can do this to anyone. I'm the leading person for president, and I'm under a gag order by a man that can't put two sentences together, given by a court, and they are in total conjunction with the White House and the DOJ.
And that was former President Trump during a news conference at Trump Tower on Friday, the day after his conviction of 34 counts of falsifying business records in a case brought by Manhattan Democrat DA Alvin Bragg. Joining me now with more, former White House senior advisor Stephen Miller and Arizona Republican Senate candidate Kari Lake. Thanks very much for joining us, the both of you. It has been a compelling morning. Stephen, your reaction to all that has taken place?
Well, the Western legal system that we have treasured and prized in this country for over 2 centuries, and that more broadly than that has been the crown jewel of Western civilization for centuries more, in this country is now dead and buried. Justice is doled out based upon whether or not it serves the agenda of the Democrat Party, the radical left, that controls the legal system. Innocent radical left rioters don't spend a day in jail, or guilty radical left rioters don't spend a day in jail, like Black Lives Matter, Antifa. Well, the innocent opposition leader to President Biden is facing a life in jail for a non-crime from a Biden donor judge that has not even been articulated. To this day, nobody can even say what the crime is because there is no crime. It's a communist show trial. We are now seeing an incredible uprising of public anger over this witch hunt, this hoax, this monstrous travesty of justice. The question for the Republican Party tactically, many of these voters have never voted before. Many of them are former Democrats. Many of them are independents. You have a multi-ethnic coalition, black, white, Hispanic. Can the Republican Party go out, register these voters, find these voters who have very little voting history, and then turn them into ballots in November? And if they do, then they're going to win a historic victory.
Well, Stephen, you just said that President Trump facing potentially lifetime in jail. Do you really believe that the president is facing jail time here?
You have seen this judge at every step of this process rig the outcome for the prosecution. You have seen him issue a First Amendment shredding gag order that precludes the presidential nominee from even discussing the fundamental financial conflict at the heart of the judge's profound bias, in addition to his donation history for anti-Trump, pro-Biden causes.
Yeah.
So I don't put anything past this judge. 34 felony convictions for a non-existent bookkeeping ledger notation crime. This is insane.
Kari, your reaction?
I echo exactly what Stephen said. I think, though, we have to look to how do we turn this into an opportunity to not just win this next election, but win it in such huge numbers that we send a very strong message to the Democrats and, frankly, the world that America is ready to turn the table and turn the page and make sure that President Trump wins again, because we got to turn this thing around. We've been concentrating for 6 weeks on this bogus trial that the whole world sees is bogus, not talking about what Hunter Biden's been up to, not talking about his upcoming trial, not talking about what's going on with Dr. Fauci that Senator Paul just mentioned, and not talking about what's happening on the border and in the economy. And that's what they want. They want us so distracted. I've been on the campaign trail the last couple days running for U.S. Senate. The crowds have been massive. People are saying, how do I get involved? I've never been involved before. We've got to do something. We've got to get President Trump back in office. And so I think Stephen's right. We're going to register these people to vote, and we are going to have a very loud message sent on November 5th.
Well, I want to see if that's actually happening in terms of the polls, in terms of the reaction post that verdict. Let's take a short break and come back with that with Stephen Miller and Kari Lake. Stay with us. Welcome back, and I am back with former White House senior advisor Stephen Miller and Arizona Senate candidate Kari Lake. And Kari, I want to kick this segment off with you. We are talking about the next steps, and the only next question is, what does this conviction mean for the presidential election and a fair election? Do you believe you can get a fair election in Arizona? Let's start there.
Well, if it were today, I would have my doubts, but I know there's some work being done. We're working very hard. We filed lawsuits. We can't fight anything that goes wrong, whether it be fraud, malfeasance, maladministration, after the fact. We've got to get ahead of it. And we have a strong AZ GOP chairwoman who's working on that right now. And we're getting people out there. I'm on the campaign trail. We are getting people registered to vote, people who've never voted before. They're not even being polled. So I don't think the polls are all that accurate for getting the temperature of where the American people are. They are fed up. They can't afford anything. And they're watching our country being invaded, and they're watching their choice for president being harassed by a corrupt legal system.
Well, Stephen, we want to understand whether or not all this new money that has flooded into the campaign will actually equate to more voters, and will we see President Trump win this? What about you? Do you think that is what is happening, and do you think we'll see a fair and transparent election?
We need to fight for a fair and transparent election. That's a task that requires every Republican AG, every Republican Secretary of State, every Republican DA, and every relevant congressional committee to be doing the hard work every day between now and the election.
Stephen Miller and Kari Lake, thank you so much. That'll do it for us. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Thanks for being with us on Sunday Morning Futures. I'll see you next week on Mornings with Maria on Fox Business.